In a land that bled hardship and whispered of forgotten dreams, where the wind itself seemed to carry the sorrow of forgotten promises, a woman, heavy with life and the phantom weight of what she had lost, built more than a cabin. She forged a testament to defiance, a testament etched in raw timber and bone-deep fatigue, destined to rise from the unforgiving earth. This solitary act, born of desperation and an unyielding will, would soon catch the predatory gaze of a man who saw not her struggle, but only her strength, a strength he coveted and sought to possess. Before we delve into this tale, let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from, and subscribe if you want more content like this one. The late afternoon sun, a fiery orb sinking behind jagged, silhouetted peaks, cast long, distorted shadows across the desolate clearing. Here, where only the toughest pines clung to the unforgiving soil, Ilara, a woman whose youth had been prematurely etched with lines of profound grief, labored with a grim, methodical rhythm. Each swing of the axe, each grunt of exertion as she wrestled a stubborn log into place, was a brutal, physical manifestation of an internal war. She was a widow, yes, but the title felt too soft, too delicate for the raw, visceral emptiness that gnawed at her core. And within her, a new life stirred, a constant, insistent reminder of both the beauty of what was and the crushing weight of what never would be. Her hands, calloused and torn, moved with a seasoned dexterity that belied her slender frame, a testament to a life lived on the fringes, where survival was a daily, unwavering prayer. The cabin, still a skeletal framework of logs and raw ambition, was not just shelter. It was a defiant middle finger to a world that had stripped her bare. Every nail hammered home, every seam meticulously chinked with mud and straw, was a desperate act of reclamation, a furious refusal to crumble beneath the immense pressure of her solitude. The air, crisp and biting, carried the scent of pine sap and damp earth, mingling with the faint metallic tang of her own sweat. She worked until the last sliver of light bled from the sky, until her muscles screamed in protest, and the tremors of exhaustion threatened to buckle her knees. She was constructing not just a home, but a future, however precarious, however uncertain, for the life that pulsed beneath her weary heart, a fragile hope in a world that offered little else. The sharp scent of pine needles, a memory from a time when laughter was not a luxury, but a common melody, pierced through Ilara's arduous day. A fleeting image, vivid and bittersweet, flickered behind her sweat-stung eyes. Liam, his face alight with an easy smile, his strong hands guiding hers as they first dreamed of a life carved from this wild expanse. They had spoken of freedom, of a small parcel of land where they could raise their own bounty, away from the crushing judgment of the bustling towns, a place where their unconventional love could flourish without the prying eyes and whispered accusations that followed them like shadows. Liam, with his easy charm, and a spirit untamed by societal expectations, had been her anchor, her compass in a world that seemed determined to break her. He had seen past the dirt and the struggle, straight into the fiercely independent core of her being, and he had loved her for it, completely and without reservation. His promises had been etched in the sunrise, in the quiet strength of his embrace, in the shared vision of a cabin, not grand or opulent but sturdy and filled with the warmth of their intertwined lives. And then, the abrupt, brutal silence. A mineshaft collapse, they said. A tragedy, an act of God. But the whispers that followed, like venomous insects, spoke of something more sinister, of greed and land disputes, of powerful men who saw nothing but profit in the earth's raw bounty. The official report was a clean, sterile document, devoid of the agonizing scream that surely tore through the rock, devoid of the chilling realization that gripped her when the news came, that a part of her soul had been buried beneath tons of unforgiving stone. Each log she lifted, each nail she drove was a quiet, furious defiance of that official narrative, a desperate attempt to build a sanctuary from the memory of that crushing loss, to honor the man whose dream she was now fighting to keep alive, not just for herself, but for the burgeoning life within her, a tiny, beating echo of Liam's enduring legacy. The cabin grew with excruciating slowness, a monument to Ilara's grim tenacity. Days bled into weeks, marked only by the shifting light and the increasing ache in her bones. The wilderness, an indifferent, formidable opponent, tested her at every turn. Sudden, fierce storms would lash the half-built structure, threatening to rip away her painstaking progress, forcing her to huddle beneath makeshift tarps, clutching her swollen belly, listening to the roaring wind, a chilling reminder of her profound isolation. The nights were long and cold, the silence often broken only by the mournful hoot of an owl or the distant howl of a coyote, sounds that seemed to underscore her aloneness. Food was a constant concern. Hunting and foraging, tasks that required energy she barely possessed, became a grueling necessity. Her body, once resilient and strong, now felt like a fragile vessel, strained by the dual demands of manual labor and the burgeoning life within. Every movement was an effort, every breath a conscious act against fatigue, yet she pushed on, driven by an almost primal instinct, a fierce, unwavering commitment to the tiny spark of hope that pulsed within her. The rough-hewn walls rose section by section, each log a testament to a battle won. The roof, a complex weave of timber and sod, began to take shape, promising true shelter from the elements. This was not merely construction, it was an act of profound self-preservation, a desperate refusal to yield to the crushing weight of circumstance. The cabin was her shield, her sanctuary, a physical manifestation of her unbroken spirit. It was the only thing standing between her and the encroaching wilderness, between her and the bitter winds of despair, a solitary beacon of her fierce, unwavering determination to survive, to build, to live, against all odds, for the future nested within her. The first time she saw him, it was a disturbance in the quiet rhythm of her labor, a discordant note in the wilderness symphony. He appeared on horseback, a silhouette against the harsh midday sun, riding with an easy confidence that spoke of power and privilege. He was a rich cowboy, the kind whose very presence seemed to alter the landscape, his broad-brimmed hat casting a shadow over a face that was both weathered and surprisingly refined. He paused at the edge of her clearing, his horse shifting restlessly, its breath puffing white in the crisp air. Ilara, instinctively, tightened her grip on the axe handle, her eyes narrowed, her body tensing, a wild, untamed creature sensing a predator. He simply watched her, his gaze lingering not on the vulnerability of her pregnant form, nor on the crude, half-finished dwelling, but on the relentless power of her movements, the raw, unyielding strength of her arms as she split wood. It was a calculating look, devoid of pity, brimming instead with an unsettling admiration that felt more like appraisal. He saw her struggle, perhaps, but it was filtered through a lens of ownership, of an entitled curiosity. There was no warmth in his gaze, no recognition of her humanity, only a cold, assessing gleam that sent an involuntary shiver down her spine despite the sun's warmth. He was a disruption, an unwelcome intrusion into the fragile peace she had painstakingly carved for herself. He embodied the very societal constructs she had tried so desperately to escape, the kind of man whose ambition crushed everything in its path, reducing lives to mere commodities. His presence, an uninvited shadow, promised to unravel the delicate tapestry of her hard-won solitude, bringing with it an unspoken threat that hung heavy in the still air, a foreboding shift in the very fabric of her existence. Silas, the rich cowboy, returned the next day, not on horseback, but on foot, emerging from the tree line with an almost deliberate casualness that was anything but. He carried no axe, no tools, only the weight of his unasked questions and a subtle, unsettling air of proprietorship. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low rumble, surprisingly smooth, yet laced with an undeniable undercurrent of steel. "Quite a sight you're making here, ma'am," he offered, his eyes sweeping over the half-finished cabin, then settling on her, a gaze that felt less like an observation and more like an inventory. Ilara's response was a terse nod, her grip on the shovel handle tightening. She had learned long ago that words were often gilded cages, designed to trap. "You're a long way from anywhere," he continued, a rhetorical statement that hung in the air, a thinly veiled question about her presence, her purpose. He made no move to help, offered no genuine assistance, his posture one of detached assessment. He spoke of the land, its value, the proximity to a nascent rail line, hints of development, of progress, all couched in terms of opportunity, but she heard only the language of acquisition. His words were polite, almost solicitous, yet the subtext hummed with a quiet insistence, an implied demand for explanation, for justification of her very existence on this parcel of earth he clearly believed belonged to someone like him. He saw the strength in her swing, the determination in her posture, and rather than inspiring respect, it seemed only to fuel his desire to possess, to control. The tension between them was palpable, a silent hum of opposing wills. She felt like a deer caught in the sights of a hunter, her instincts screaming, her every nerve alight with a primal warning. He represented the forces that had always sought to diminish her, to define her by her circumstances, to take what she had worked so desperately to build. The air crackled with unspoken conflict, a precursor to the storm she knew was brewing, a storm that threatened to engulf the fragile shelter she was so fiercely trying to erect. The thinly veiled threats began to shed their disguise, revealing the sharp, predatory edges beneath. Silas's visits became more frequent, his tone shifting from curious to insistent, then to outright demanding. He spoke of squatters' rights, of land claims, his words a relentless drumbeat against the fragile walls of her burgeoning home. He implied that her claim was tenuous, her position precarious, that without his generosity, she would find herself truly adrift. "This land," he drawled one afternoon, gesturing broadly with a proprietary sweep of his hand, "is ripe for development. There are others who have expressed keen interest. I merely offer you a fair price, a way out before things get complicated." His offer of money, a paltry sum that wouldn't even buy her passage back to the life she'd fled, was an insult, a clear indication that he saw her and her future as disposable. He made it clear that he believed her strength, the very trait he seemed to admire, was a commodity to be bought, leveraged, or, if necessary, crushed. His eyes, devoid of empathy, held a chilling gleam of resolve, a cold certainty that he would have what he wanted, no matter the cost to her. Ilara, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, met his gaze with an unwavering stare. She had learned early that fear was a weapon, and she refused to give him the satisfaction of wielding it against her. Her defiance, an almost palpable shield around her, seemed only to infuriate him further, to solidify his resolve to break her. He saw her as an obstacle, a stubborn, irrational woman standing in the way of his grand designs, his profit. The very air around them thrummed with the unspoken conflict, a silent battle of wills, where the land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who would yield, who would break, and who would ultimately prevail in this desolate, windswept arena of human ambition. The memory, like a shard of glass buried deep, had always pulsed beneath the surface, a constant low thrum of pain and something else, regret, perhaps even complicity. It was a particular kind of darkness that shrouded Liam's final days, not merely the physical gloom of the mine, but the shadows of desperation, the reckless choices made under the immense pressure of their mounting debts. They had been trying to buy this land outright, not merely squat on it, pouring every meager saving, every scrap of hope into the dream. Liam, bless his restless soul, had fallen in with men who promised quick riches, men whose smiles didn't reach their eyes and whose words were slick with deception. They spoke of a vein, a hidden lode, deeper than any known, and Liam, blinded by the fervent desire to secure their future, had believed them. He had borrowed, he had risked, he had descended into the earth one last time, driven by a love that had, in its purest form, turned tragically reckless. Ilara, in her desperation, had known about these dealings. She had harbored misgivings, her instincts screaming caution, but she had remained silent, caught between fear and a desperate longing for the security Liam promised. Her silence, a heavy cloak woven from fear and a misguided hope, had allowed him to walk into that abyss. The mine collapse, therefore, wasn't just an accident. It was the brutal, inevitable culmination of a series of desperate choices, some Liam's, some implicitly hers. The truth was a festering wound. Liam wasn't just a victim of circumstance, but of a calculated gamble that had gone tragically wrong, fueled by the very ambitions that now, ironically, threatened to consume her. This wasn't merely a struggle for survival. It was an act of atonement, a furious, silent penance for the choices that had led to his demise and her current, precarious existence. The land, therefore, was not just earth beneath her feet. It was a grave, a promise, and a burden, all inextricably woven into the fabric of her being, shaping her every desperate swing of the axe. The sun beat down, relentlessly, upon the clearing, mirroring the relentless pressure that had built between Alara and Silas. He stood before her, not on horseback now, but on her own nascent porch, a figure of entitled authority, his voice no longer smooth but edged with a chilling impatience. "Look, ma'am," he began, his hand resting on a timber she had meticulously planed, a gesture of casual dominion that made her blood run cold. "I've been patient. This land will be mine. One way or another. You can take my offer and walk away, or you can find out what happens when someone stands in the path of progress." The implied threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was not merely about the land. It was about power, about his right to dictate her future, to erase her defiance. Alara met his gaze, her jaw tight, a tremor running through her exhausted frame, but her eyes held an unyielding fire. "This land," she rasped, her voice hoarse from disuse and defiance, "is all I have left. It is where my husband lies. It is where my child will be born. It is not for sale." Her words, sparse and unadorned, were a blunt refusal, an unbreakable shield against his veiled aggression. Silas's face hardened, his lips thinning into a cruel line. He had underestimated her, mistaken her weariness for weakness, her solitude for vulnerability. He saw now, perhaps for the first time, not a desperate woman, but an adversary, one whose will was as unyielding as the granite beneath their feet. The air crackled, thick with unspoken violence, a silent testament to the clash of two opposing worlds. His, built on acquisition and control, hers forged in loss and desperate, unshakable hope. The silence stretched, pregnant with tension, until even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable, for the collision that would define not just her future, but the very essence of her being. The confrontation, though brief in its verbal exchange, reverberated with the force of an earthquake. Silas, his patience exhausted, had made his move, bringing with him a rough-hewn document, a spurious claim of ownership, backed by the implicit threat of men who waited just beyond the tree line. "Sign this," he commanded, his voice devoid of its former smooth veneer, "or face the consequences." Alara, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, saw the desperation in his eyes, a mirroring of her own. He was not merely arrogant. He was driven by a hunger that bordered on obsession, a greed that clouded his judgment. In that suspended moment, a clarity descended upon her, sharp and chilling. She recognized the same reckless ambition that had consumed Liam, though masked by different guises. This was not merely about land, it was about life itself, about the right to breathe, to exist, to protect the fragile life within her. As Silas extended the paper, his hand trembling slightly with barely suppressed rage, Alara did not reach for it. Instead, her eyes, dark and fathomless, locked onto his, and a truth, raw and untamed, escaped her lips, a truth that struck deeper than any threat of force. "You want this land?" she whispered, her voice carrying a strange, almost ethereal calm. "Then you must take it over my grave, over his grave." She gestured towards the earth where Liam lay buried, a silent, defiant challenge. Her words, imbued with the weight of her grief and the power of her unshakable will, momentarily stunned him. He saw not a defeated woman, but a force of nature, primal and unyielding. It was in that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the clearing in an eerie twilight, that the first pangs of labor, sharp and undeniable, seized Alara. A gasp escaped her, not of fear, but of a fierce, desperate surge of life. Silas, taken aback by the unexpected turn, by the raw vulnerability and ferocious strength simultaneously on display, faltered. The sudden visceral reality of her impending birth, coupled with her unwavering defiance, seemed to momentarily crack his hardened resolve. The immediate threat, the signed document, the waiting men, receded, replaced by the overwhelming, undeniable force of new life asserting itself in the face of death and greed. He hesitated, then, unnerved by the profound shift in the very atmosphere, by the raw, untamed power emanating from her, he turned, his boots crunching on the dry leaves, and retreated into the encroaching darkness, leaving her alone once more, to face the most profound transition of her life under the vast, indifferent sky. The world outside the crude, but now fully enclosed, walls of the cabin still hummed with the echoes of conflict, a subtle tension that clung to the very air. Silas, though repelled by the unexpected turn of events, was not a man to easily abandon his desires. Yet, his retreat, triggered by the raw, primal force of Alara's defiance and the undeniable arrival of new life, had granted her a crucial, if temporary, reprieve. Within the cabin, a soft, rhythmic breathing filled the space, a fragile lullaby against the vast silence of the wilderness. Her child, a tiny, perfect being, lay nestled against her breast, a warm, insistent weight that anchored her to the present, to the future. Every line on Alara's face, every scar on her hands, told a story of survival, of a battle fought not with weapons, but with sheer unyielding will. The cabin, now fully formed, stood as a defiant testament to her endurance, its walls absorbing the last slivers of the harsh daylight. She had built it with her own hands, pregnant, grieving, alone, and it was more than just shelter. It was a sanctuary, a physical manifestation of her unbroken spirit. The dark, tense days were not entirely behind her. The memory of Silas's avarice lingered like a foul taste, but the immediate threat had passed, replaced by a profound, if fragile, sense of peace. She had faced down the forces that sought to consume her, and she had emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably whole, her strength forged in the crucible of loss and relentless struggle. The battle for the land might not be truly over, but for now, she had won the most crucial fight of all, the right to exist, to nurture, to build a new life from the ashes of the old, proving that even in the most desolate of landscapes, hope could take root and blossom, fierce and beautiful.